Hi everyone. So I've been tagged for this 15 movies list thing. That is where you give a list of the top 15 movies that have made the biggest impact in your life, or something along those lines. I don't have a list of movies, but I have a list of games, and so I figured I would show this list in video form. And by video form I don't mean I won't not showing the games, just me talking about them. So I'm going to make it clear, these are 15 games that I think have made a big impact on me. That does not mean these are my favourite games, far from it in some cases. It does not mean that there aren't other games that have made a big impact on me, because there certainly are loads. But these are just ones that came to mind where I thought, like, I've got to make a concise list of 15. And because of this, I've tried to keep it down to one per franchise. I generally don't like that rule, but I'm not sticking to that rule exactly. But there was some times where there was like one series where I'd have like 3 or 4 entries, and I'm thinking I've got to cut this down. So yeah, and also there's no value judgment on any of these games because I'm going to list them in what I believe to be the chronological order in which I played them, at least best to my recollection. So, let's get started. Now, Tearaway Thomas was the first game I ever played. Now that, in and of itself, means it's going to be influential. I mean, of all the games I've played now, that was the very first, so it's bound to mean something. But not only that, I can actually look back at this game today and still see really great things in it that I obviously didn't really appreciate when I was 4 years old when I first played it. So that's the reason why I'm putting Tearaway Thomas on this list. Sonic the Hedgehog. I've actually got a story behind this, kind of. It wasn't actually my game to begin with, it was my uncle's. And the way that used to work is that I had an Amiga at home, but my uncle had a Mega Drive at his house. And so, whenever I went to my grandma's house, which is where he lived at the time, there was always that excitement that I might be able to play Sonic, because I didn't have a Mega Drive and I couldn't play Sonic. So he basically showed me Sonic, and I was obsessed with Sonic for a few years. Anyone who knew me in like primary school can vouch for that I was like really into Sonic. It's definitely not my favourite Sonic game, but it really did mean a lot. The fact that that was the first one I played, and the whole Sonic thing, at least with the 2D games, it's really stuck with me from that. Okay, Crash Bandicoot, another platform game. It's the third platform game in this series of years. But Crash Bandicoot was kind of special in that I don't think it was the first 3D game I played graphically, but it was the first 3D game I played gameplay-wise where you can actually move in 3 directions. 3 dimensions. Not 3 directions. You can actually move in 3 dimensions. Now, looking back now, the game isn't fantastic by any means, and I definitely say that there's better Crash Bandicoot games out there, namely 2 and 3, but this was the first one, and this was the first 3D one. It was my first experience with playing a game in 3D, and so the idea of being able to move inwards and outwards, it was a pretty big deal at the time, and I did play it a lot when I actually got it, and it was the first PlayStation game I got as well, which was my granddad's originally. So next on this list is Tomb Raider 2, and the reason I put Tomb Raider 2 on this list is because when I first got Tomb Raider 2, it was the first game. Well, first of all, I loved the game, but second of all, it's because it was the first game in which I felt a sense of adventure as opposed to just travelling through a world, if you know what I mean. It actually manifested the real world in a sense, and I'm generally not a fan of that usually in most cases with games that come out today, but the graphics were realistic for the time. It had solid platforming, and regardless, I know people say, oh, the controls are awful, but I think they're great. and everything. It's all about like the puzzles and how the puzzles fit together and adapting yourself to the environment, and I thought that was really, really good how they did that. Yeah, Tomb Raider 2, I loved it, and I still do. Sawblade was actually a game that I first played at an arcade, and it was when we all went on holiday to Pontins. Don't know what I was at the time, but it was a game as far as I was concerned at the time. I was mashing buttons, going through arcade mode, but I eventually did get it on the PS1, and I'm glad I did, because of Edge Master Mode, which really, really interested me. It is the fighting game that has stuck with me the most, I'd say, even though there are other fighting games from around that time that I also really liked. But I like this one the most, and this was the one that really introduced me to the idea of going through specific challenges and the fact that you could collect different weapons for different characters. So it introduced that idea of customizing a character, even if it wasn't like grand RPG style customization. It was the idea that you could go forwards and you could collect weapons and you can choose which weapon to equip, and they all have different effects. So like some would drain your life, but would also be more powerful, and then you'd have others which would have longer range, and you have some that would heal you if you attack, things like that. It was really, really interesting, and I really got into that game. Okay, so the next game on the list is Pipoint 2. Now, I did play Pipoint 1 before Pipoint 2, and Pipoint 1 did introduce me to that style of game, which I had not seen before, I don't think. It's like a party game, up to 4 players, and you've got to compete in this environment and try to take each other out. It was really, really enjoyable. But Pipoint 2 was quite of a bigger thing, in a way, because there's a sense of disbelief that there actually was a Pipoint 2 that existed. So when I actually did get Pipoint 2, it was like, Pipoint 2! Like, wow, this is a new thing. I can't believe that there's a Pipoint 2. I mean, I was already told that there was a Pipoint 2 before I got the game, but it was one of those things where it was not so easy to believe, if you get what I mean, because Pipoint was so obscure. So, yeah, and also Pipoint 2 is a great fun game to play, and has the advantage of the first one in that it works, it's more balanced in that it works more like how a game show would, and it's harder, it's longer, and it's harder. Yeah. Insert joke there. Yeah. Okay, next. Now, Pokemon Red is a game that I actually didn't know existed until the day I got it. It wasn't so much that I went to the shops and found it, it's just that I was told on the day, get Pokemon. Someone just said, get Pokemon that day. I was like, okay. Went out to what was, I believe, Woolworths at the time, and I saw Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue. And then we asked at the counter what the difference would be between Red and Blue, and they were saying that, well, you can get different Pokemon on different games, and so you have to like trade with different people on the different games. And my instinct told me that most people would get Blue, so I just went with Red. I was like, right, I'm going to get Red. No idea what type of game it was, and I've never played an RPG before at this point. So I got home, put it in my Game Boy, had a go at it, and it was really weird because I expected it to be like a weird platform game. Because, you know, Charizard's on the cover. I expected like you would you'd like have a platform segment, and then you would have a bit where you play as Charizard and you'd like fly around all these obstacles. But it turned out to be this other type of game that I'd never heard of before. This other type of game with like where you take turns in battle and you walk around in tall grass and you can find Pokemon. And it was like, oh, you know, you can catch the Pokemon and they can become yours, and then you can train them, and then they can become stronger. and this blew my mind. This whole idea that I could go out there and collect something, well, it wasn't just a case of that's the solution to the game, but it was more so like, it's what I'm doing. These are the Pokemon that I'm getting. I'm training these ones, and it just felt fantastic. There's like this real connection with the game. Now, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 was a game that I played after the first one, but I was no good at the first one when I first played it, and I was no good at the second one. But I did get them both at the same time one birthday afterwards, and I started playing them and I got really, really good. Now, Tony Hawk's 2 stuck in my mind more than one, because it had the Creator Park editor, and I was really, really into that. I can still kind of remember the first park I made, which was awful, but after that I kind of gained the reputation of being able to make really good skate parks, and people really, really liked them. And I also gained the reputation of being incredibly good at the game. So, while I started being terrible, I ended up being way better than everyone else. These days, everyone else has caught up and probably overtaken me, so I'm not that great now. But at the time, and especially with my circle of friends that knew the game, I was the best by far. And there was one time there was this kid who was really like smug and, you know, really full of himself, saying, "Oh, I'm better than you, and everyone like, "Oh, I can't believe you're not doing a nose blunt side. All you have to do is press up triangle." And so I was like, "Well, I'll give you a game," and he was like, "Fine then," and I won, and I was like, yeah. But see, it wasn't just that though. It was a really fun game, but also I've got Tony Hawk 2 to thank for introducing me to some brilliant music. I mean, Millencolin was on Tomb Raider, Tony Hawk's 2. Bad Religion, my favourite band, discovered them on Tony Hawk's 2, and then even bands that I like that weren't on Tony Hawk's 2, I actually was motivated to buy the other Tony Hawk games and discover great bands from those as well. So I had a real sweet spot for Tony Hawk's 2. As Your Dreams. This is a game that when I got it, I didn't know what to think about it. It seemed weird, but I was kind of drawn to the weirdness. I didn't understand what was going on, but there was something about the theme to the game. There was something about how it was set up, and everything felt so royal and posh, and everything seemed so proper and everything. And it felt sophisticated. It had a level of sophistication to it that I wasn't used to. So I was drawn to it. And I wasn't familiar with roguelikes. It was the first roguelike I played. But I was drawn to it, and I really got into it. And the whole idea of having to be careful when you're in this tower and collecting items and raising a familiar, which I'd already become accustomed to raising monsters from Pokemon. But it was this idea of you having to be careful, and the idea of it's all about the tower runs and how far through the tower you can go and how good of a tower run you can get and getting the rewards from if you escape. And I never really had a game, I think, before then, which really had this element of risk and reward. So you have to balance the risks and reward to get the biggest payoff, and that, along with how royal everything seemed and how weird it came across, I was really drawn to it. Now, I actually am a much bigger fan of this game now than I was then, even though it left a really good impression on me. But since playing more games and since playing that game some more, that game is, like, honestly right at the top of my list. I adore As Your Dreams. Next up is Final Fantasy VIII, and Final Fantasy VIII was the first Final Fantasy game I've played, and given how much I like Final Fantasy in general, that in and of itself is a big thing. But the way I was introduced to Final Fantasy VIII was that I was told about it, didn't think it was very good after hearing about it, because I was probably playing something else and probably have my mind focused on something else. But I was shown it, and my first reaction was, oh my god, this is amazing. Why haven't I heard about this game? Do other people know about this game? If not, why not? We have to tell them. We have to do the world a favour and tell them about this game. And my first thoughts were, this game is if you took the feeling that I had about Pokemon when I was first introduced to Pokemon and ramped it up to 11, as the saying goes. I absolutely loved that game. I really got into it. And I've got to say that of all these important games, Final Fantasy, it's probably the most important, even though it's not my favourite on the list, and it's also not even my favourite game. Obviously, if it's not my favourite on the list, obviously it's not my favourite game. But yeah, it's not my favourite game, but it ranks really high up there, and not just that, but it left a lot of nostalgia, and it's just, I've got a soft spot for it. Plus, I really like the game. Age of Empires 2 is actually a game that I never really got into, but I had a few friends at school who were playing it and they would talk about it all the time, and I was curious. But I did actually manage to play it somewhere else soon after that, and I got into it. I did eventually get the game myself, and it was just so much fun. And like even nowadays, there's the HD version on Steam that you can download, and that is great. People can complain, oh, it's not fully HD. Well, so what? It's, you know, it's still it's Age of Empires 2. It's a fantastic game. Yeah, so we played that loads, and in terms of multiplayer games, which I didn't play very often, I played that one a lot. I really got into it, and I still really enjoy it today. And it was the first RTS game I played as well, so it was really the first introduction I had to building your own civilization and gathering resources. It was all very interesting and all a lot of fun. And there's also the map editor where you could effectively make your own games, and that was fantastic. Yeah, Age of Empires 2. Dragon Quest VIII. When I first played this game, I can't think of a word to describe how I felt. I felt like I was 5 again, playing games for the first time. It was like rediscovering games. I can't put my finger on exactly what it was, but for example, the graphics are beautiful. It was the first game I played where you had a world map that was of the same graphical fidelity as the general, like in towns and in dungeons and stuff. But there was just something about the game where I played it and I felt like I'd rediscovered games. You know, like when you're really young and you want to get up in the morning really early to rush and play whatever game it is or do whatever. It was like that. But I was like 17. I was 17. I'd get up in the middle of the night. I couldn't sleep because I wanted to play Dragon Quest VIII. It got to the point where I'd load it up and I'd start grinding with my eyes closed because I learned I had already grinded enough to be able to become strong enough to do this, and I had learned like specific button combinations so that I could like defeat slimes and stuff outside February. I just couldn't get enough of the game. I absolutely loved it, and I still think, even now, I think it's a brilliant, brilliant game. Disgaea 2. I bought this game on a whim. I had previously gone on GameSpot and I was thinking, I want to look for more RPGs. I saw Disgaea 2 and I saw some footage of it, and it was like that grid-based RPG that I generally wasn't that into. I saw some characters in this video do like some moves where they're doing like 10,000s of damage, and I'm thinking, that's not usual for that type of game. I was thinking, it looks a bit odd. Well, there was one day I went out and I was thinking, I'm going to get a new game, and I saw Disgaea 2 in game, that's the shop game, and I thought, maybe not. I wasn't keen on getting it, but after looking around and finding nothing else, I resorted to getting it, and I'm so glad I did. I got it, played it for a while, thinking, this is pretty good. I then did some research online and finding the maximum level is 9,999, which I was thinking, what? Okay, I've been like playing for so many hours on like level 10, what's going on? And then I did some more research and I found out about like the item world, how felonies work, all the different residents and the different items and stuff, and I discovered all this and I was just like, wow. And like it was like reincarnation as well. It just all blew my mind, like just how much can go into leveling up in a game. This game introduced me to that, and oh god, yeah, I was just amazed. I remember before then thinking to myself, is there an RPG where we can go over level 100? And then it turns out that there's one where, yes, by a factor of 100? Yeah, crazy. Next is Guitar Hero 2. This game, I'm not gonna lie, it was a fad. There was a whole stream of Guitar Hero games coming out, and I know there's some people that play Guitar Hero and Rock Band and stuff, and I'm sure I would. I'm sure if I got into the mood, I'm like, I fancy some Guitar Hero, I'm gonna go and play Guitar Hero. Because I did. And I have done that. And, you know, and then there's that whole, Rocksmith, is it called? You know, the one where it's like you need a real guitar, which some people, I imagine, really into that still. But anyway, the point is that Guitar Hero 2, even though it's not like a really deep game, it doesn't have loads of really fancy mechanics that I found really, really interesting at the time, what it did do is it introduced me to a concept of rhythm games, which I knew about rhythm games, I knew about DDR and the like, but it introduced me to this idea that there's a rhythm game with a guitar, and there was something about it that felt really good. It felt really neat to play it, and I did get into it quite a lot. It was Christmas 2007, I believe, that I got it on the PS2, and I did really, really have a good time with it. Yeah. Playing Psychobilly Freakout, and Let's Talk More Rock, and Jordan, and those were the main three. So Lightning Returns, Final Fantasy XIII, is the last game on this list, and this is the game, this is obviously last on the list, so that's chronologically as well. This game came out in 2014, so it's not like I've had loads of time and I'm being able to reflect back on it and all that sort of stuff. But it did do something great, because I love Final Fantasy XIII, right? People can complain about the stuff as much as they want, whatever, I'm not going into that now. But, you know, I love Final Fantasy XIII. 13 too. Yeah, it's good. It's a good game. I didn't get into it as much. But what really, really hit me was that I've really been getting sick of particular trends that are going on in gaming, like certain types of game mechanics that you just see all too often, things that are really, and the term that's often used to describe these is hand-holding, and I think the term hand-holding makes sense, but I think it can kind of give the idea, I think it can kind of give a false impression that these things are easy. I don't mean difficulty here. But what I've really, really loved about Lightning Returns is that it really showed me that there are still games being made that cater to people like me, and that people who love resource management, people who love, well, time management, for example. I mean, not that I've played many games with time management in general, but this game has fantastic time management. It also showed me that it is possible to have an open world game, and I'm going to call it open world, where there are restrictions and limitations to where you can go, but still I'm open enough geographically as to what I would call open world in a sense, but still not feel like every place is the same place with slight variations of things. So I'm just going to change my hand here because my arm's hurting. I've been switching hands throughout the whole thing. No dirty jokes. Anyway, yeah, so it really like revitalised my idea. It really showed me that there are game companies that are willing to put time limits on, that are willing to give you limited inventory space, that are willing to do all these things whereby you are punished for your failures. Now I know, before anyone points this out to me, Demon Souls and Dark Souls do that. I know they do, but I've barely played them, so this doesn't necessarily apply to this. But there's this idea of the fact that you can get to the final boss, and you have to make sure that you're ready for the final boss, because if you don't, you have to start again from day one, carrying all the stats and weapons and stuff from the New Game Plus. And this whole feeling of preparing yourself for the next cycle, and building up and thinking so far ahead of yourself, and not just what am I doing now for what am I doing now's sake, but to think so far ahead. And everything matters in that game. Your health matters. If you're in a random battle, I say no, not random battle, if you're against a battle against weak enemies or general enemies and they take a lot of health off you that you could have avoided, that has a knock-on effect, because to cure it uses up an item or it takes up EP. That EP could also be used to freeze time or to teleport, which could be used to save you doing this other thing or this other thing. Everything has a knock-on effect. Nothing comes free. And it's just this whole level of integration that I adore. So it's not an old game, it's a very new game in comparison, but it really assured me that there are games still being made to do this. Now granted, people complained and moaned about the timer, as if getting rid of that would somehow fix everything, instead of, you know, changing the way that everything works. And I'm having to switch arms again, which means I'm tired of holding the thing, so it means I'm rambling. That's what it means. Anyway, this has gone on long enough.